Huge crowds are still gathering at the gates of Kabul airport, despite warnings by Britain and the United States about threats of a terror attack there. Military commanders say jihadis from the self-styled Islamic State group may try to carry out suicide bombings in crowds trying to get onto a flight. Those outside the airport have been warned to leave the area immediately. With that option being cut off, big crowds are also building up on the Afghan side of the land border with Pakistan. Let's get you the very latest from Kabul. My correspondent Secunda Kamani has been talking to people there, desperate to get away.
Well, I was there at the airport yesterday, still huge crowds of people turning up, and we're talking about whole families here. I saw elderly women being pushed along in wheelbarrows because they were unable to walk, small children being carried by their parents. Many of the people said they'd been camped outside the airport for a number of days in dire conditions. A lot of them had no permission to board any of the evacuation flights, but were so desperate to leave that they just turned up anyway in the hope that somehow, if they showed documents proving that they'd worked with international forces or foreign charities or foreign embassies, they'd somehow be allowed to go through. That won't be the case, of course. And the huge crowds there of people without permission, making it all the more difficult for the handful who do have the correct travel documents to be able to make it through. Now, the Pentagon says around 10,000 people are still waiting at the airport to be evacuated as the US military effort to evacuate all these people gathers pace. Our colleague Graham Satchell has this report.
Day after day for more than a week now, distressing pictures of Afghans at Kabul airport desperate to leave. Now a new warning from the British and American governments who say there is a high threat of a terrorist attack here. The advice: do not travel to the airport. It means a hugely difficult operation to get people out has just got worse. Latest figures from the Ministry of Defence show more than 12,000 people have so far been evacuated to the UK. Of those, almost 7,000 are Afghans and their families. But more than 1,000 interpreters and other staff who worked for Britain still need to be evacuated. The BBC has spoken to one former interpreter now hiding in Kabul, terrified of being discovered by the Taliban.
If I'm left here, I will be killed by them as soon as they find me. So it will be very important for me to get as soon as possible to the UK, because I worked for 3 years with the British forces, and so the Taliban will never, ever leave me alive.
Overnight, another plane arrives at RAF Brize Norton in Oxfordshire. On board, the lucky ones who've made it. But this operation is time limited. Officially, the deadline is next Tuesday. In reality, the window will close before then. It will take at least 48 hours for British and American troops to manage their own departure. So a plea from a former military commander in Afghanistan.
Please, don't leave them behind. In the time that's available, the next 5 or 6 days, don't close the gates. Let's get the most vulnerable people into the United Kingdom and into safety. Not just interpreters, but those who fought on the battlefield against the Taliban and those who fought their ideology and are therefore under significant threat.
The Taliban control the streets of Kabul and decide who gets out. With the new advice to stay away from the airport, there are now serious questions about how this operation will end and how many more people will make it to safety. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Well, concerns also rising about security at the airport with the UK and the US. Amongst those warning about the threat of an attack there, that's thought to likely emanate from the Islamic State group. The group is nowhere near as powerful as the Taliban in Afghanistan, but they do have a presence here and they have a history of carrying out horrific, devastating attacks on the softest of targets. So many of these Western countries advising their citizens not to travel to the airport at the moment. The UK's Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, had this stark warning.
The reality is that clearly if we are asking people to move away, we are effectively also saying that reduces our capacity to process people. Now, you may well see footage of people who have ignored the advice and remained in the queue, that we are desperately trying to protect by bringing them inside as quickly as we're able to. But that should not encourage people to travel to the airport, because I can't stress the desperation of the situation enough. The threat is credible, it is imminent, it is lethal. We wouldn't be saying this if we weren't genuinely concerned about offering Islamic State a target that is just unimaginable.
Well, concerns also rising amongst regional countries about the effects of any spillover, either from the refugee crisis or from instability within Afghanistan. Pakistan, of course, one of those countries. Pakistan has long been accused by the West and the previous Afghan government of sponsoring the Taliban, of tacitly supporting their insurgency, though they've always denied that. Pakistan has also been a destination for many Afghan refugees, with millions already living in the country. We've seen large crowds gathering at one of the major border crossing points in Spin Boldak to the south of the city of Kandahar. Some Afghans being let through. It appears many others still waiting to get out. It's of course a little hard to get accurate information from the Afghan side because so many local Afghan journalists have now stopped working or have fled the country, concerned about their own security. Well, the BBC was speaking to the Pakistani National Security Advisor, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, a little earlier. He said that it's important that there's no security vacuum left in Afghanistan, as that could allow terrorist groups to take hold.
Afghans deserve better from the world. Please don't overshadow the mistakes that have been made just by turning a blind eye to what will happen next if we leave. History will not forgive us, and a security vacuum, mind you, will end up with the same results for the West that it did last time. And UK is much more vulnerable than the US and others. So I don't understand why we keep talking about Afghans as commodities. Oh, there's going to be a humanitarian crisis. No, we must avoid it. We must do it together.
Well, concerns about security, also concerns here in Afghanistan about what the future holds for the country, what kind of rules the Taliban are planning on implementing. Of course, when they were in power in the 1990s, they implemented a very harsh and strict interpretation of Sharia law. They banned women from working, girls from being educated. At the moment, here in Kabul, for example, the Taliban have appeared much more moderate. Their tone in public has been much more conciliatory, though there are concerns that that may not last beyond the international presence. Many Afghans that I speak to here think that perhaps the Taliban are deliberately trying as a PR exercise to appear much more moderate, much more progressive than they really are. But once the world's eyes are off them, then their true colors will be shown. Whenever I speak to Taliban leaders, they say no, that's not the case, that actually they've learnt from some of their mistakes in the past, and they want to inform what they want to form what they say is an inclusive government. I must stress that whilst we see these terribly chaotic and horrific scenes at the airport, the rest of Kabul is very different. It's much calmer. Certainly there's a sense of unease, a sense of uncertainty about what the future holds, but shops are open, people are out and about in the streets, traffic is driving along. Less people, in particular fewer women than usual, but still certainly not as chaotic as what we see in the airport. And it's quite surreal, really, to get your head around the differences, the stark differences between these two pictures of what we see in the airport and what we see in the rest of the country.